breakfast.
Good morning, and welcome to Comics for Breakfast. I'm your host, Jason Mink. This morning we're talking about Spider-Man's greatest nemesis. No, it's not Doc Ock or even the Green Goblin. Hey, it's not even the Mind Worm, although he's definitely up there. No, the only person I could possibly be talking about is the man, the myth, the legend, and that is the one and only J. Jonah Jameson. From the moment he made his debut in Amazing Spider-Man #1 in March 1963, JJJ has been making trouble for America's favorite wall crawler. But Mink, you're surely saying, how can one man with no superpowers rival some of the most dangerous villains ever to grace the printed page? How can one crusty curmudgeon like Jameson get over on a genius-level hero whose abilities make him more than a match for any adversary? Well, give Aunt May her pills, pack some extra web fluid cartridges, and join me now as we dive headfirst into the world of Jameson. Beginning as a scrappy young journalist on the mean streets of New York City, J. Jonah Jameson was soon drafted into the Second World War. Returning home from a fact-finding mission in Korea, Jameson was stunned to discover his wife had been killed in a petty crime. Unable to deal with the loss, Jameson grew distant from his son and relentlessly driven to succeed in his chosen field, becoming one of the most feared and respected reporters in the city. Realizing his teenage ambition of becoming editor-in-chief of New York's biggest newspaper, the Daily Bugle, Jameson was soon using the paper to ferret out corruption wherever he saw it. Armed with this considerable tool of swaying public interest, Jameson brought it to bear when news of media sensation Spider-Man began to appear. Convinced the masked character was a publicity-seeking glory hound, the publisher printed a series of editorials attacking and condemning the webbed hero. Indeed, over the years, JJJ's been responsible for Spidey being hated by the public, wanted by the police, and suspected of no less than murder. However, as we shall soon see, turning public opinion against Spider-Man was just the beginning. We begin with Amazing Spider-Man #25, reprinted here in Marvel Tales #20, and a tale tantalizingly titled Captured by J. Jonah Jameson. And what a cover! This story was crafted by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, a team that had really built up a head of steam in the preceding 2 years. Readers had seen Peter Parker go from a puny pushover to a more balanced and palpable protagonist, overcoming numerous obstacles in both his personal and extracurricular lives. Indeed, Peter was only one issue away from high school graduation and the next chapter in his far more complicated existence. But enough of my mealy mumblings. Let's dive right in. We start with this jazzy splash page. What happens to a superhero on the run when he has no place to go? Note the arrow at the bottom of the page. Stan acknowledges Steve came up with the plot for this one. Indeed, from here on out, Steve was credited as plotter for his remaining issues on the title. Our tale begins with Peter Parker leaving fellow student Liz Allen after a tutoring session. Pete makes a detour to retrieve his spider beam, which he left on a nearby rooftop the previous issue. From this vantage point, Peter notices 3 auto thieves below. Instead of suiting up to stop them, our boy uses his spider beam to guide a beat cop to the scene. Always an opportunist, Peter snaps a few pics to sell to his boss, Daily Bugle editor-in-chief J. Jonah Jameson, then heads home to work on his spare costume, which he finishes and stashes in his bedroom. The next day, Parker shows up at the Bugle, but As Peter's picks don't feature Spidey himself, JJJ turns him down. But the kid is nothing if not persistent. He convinces Jameson that the pics show Spider-Man in a poor light and that running them would damage the web spinner's credibility. Jonah's secretary and Peter's sometimes girlfriend, Betty Brant, is shocked at this turn in Parker's personality, especially since Spider-Man had just saved she and May Parker from the Sinister Six in The Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1. Before she can have a kitten, attention shifts to this curious duo. This is Professor Sylvester Smythe, and his mechanical pal here is the answer to JJJ's Spider-Man problem. Jameson blows the guy off, but once again, Peter's there to push the issue. In the kid's mind, this is a fine opportunity to put the pushy publisher in his place once and for all by beating up on this guy's robot. And if Pete can sell a few pics of said encounter, well, all the better. This kid's got a real racket going. However, the old Parker luck remains true to form, as the clunky-looking automaton is actually a highly efficient arachnid-catching machine. Parker is ensnared by the machine, whose steel bands prove to be unbreakable, even with his spider strength. The kid is left entangled for a bit as the grown-ups talk, driving the point home that once the robot's prey is caught, it stays caught. Betty uses this opportunity to bust Peter's chops about turning on Spider-Man, and that's quite the caboose on Betty there. Ditko, you sly dog. She drags Parker hard, leaving our hero wondering how it had all gone wrong so quickly. Cut to the next day at Midtown High, and the gang's all here. Meathead jock Flash Thompson takes issue with Peter horning in on his gal Liz and makes a date with him later after school to break his face. And while Peter is long past worrying about Flash, he's still mighty shaken up about Smythe's robot, imagining it lurking behind every corner. And speaking of, here's Smythe and Jonah getting the unit ready for its first test run. We're treated to this hilarious scene of robot Jonah harassing his employees, further underscoring his nemesis-ness. However, the hijinks are short-lived as the robot catches Spider-Man's scent and hurries off to find him. At the same time, school is let out for the day. And while Flash is still intent on curb-stomping old Sweater Vest here, Peter is far more concerned about his impending robotic demise and runs off, leading to this Universal monster movie-style scene as the town's teeners turn into a vengeful, jeering mob. Pete tries his best to keep the kids between himself and the robot, heading to the rooftops to doff his civilian clothing and change into Spider-Man. He doesn't even get fully dressed before the robot catches up, and the game is on. What follows is a thrilling chase across the Manhattan skyline. Spidey quickly discovers he's unable to even slow the robot down, as his webbing won't stick to its oiled surface. With metallic tentacles lashing ever closer, the wall crawler retreats, much to Jameson's delight. However, Betty Brant isn't as amused and attempts to thwart the scheme by breaking off the control panel's knob. It's a good try, but she's thwarted. She should have used the Wiggum method. Far more effective. Her first try a botch, Betty then attempts to quite literally pull the plug on the robot, dropping some papers as a pretense. Tired of her ample-bottomed shenanigans, Jameson hustles her out of the office so he can get on with it. Cut to Spidey and his robot playmate, and our hero can't get a break. No matter what he does, Smythe's robot is there, closing in on the desperate teen by the moment. The mocking visage of Jameson makes it all the more humiliating, his grinning, shark-like face flickering across the silver screen. Back to Betty, who's headed to Peter's place. On the way, she runs into Liz Allen, and the two exchange catty comments before dropping in on Aunt May. Only she's not alone. Why, it's no less than Mary Jane Watson, with what appears to be a cellophane bag over her head. Since that drawing didn't quite come out the way Steve had hoped, he drew this Triffid here, which doesn't really help matters. It's best to just move on and wait till Ramita gets here. Spidey has managed to put a little distance between himself and the robot, but it's short-lived. While our hero is tiring, the machine barrels on at full speed. Before old Webhead can react, the robot springs its coiled trap, ensnaring him in an unbreakable metal cage. Jameson takes the opportunity to really rub it in Spidey's face. Why, this is his greatest victory. They may even ask him to join the Avengers. He'll turn them down, of course. He's a publisher, not a damn superhero. Unable to risk moving the robot, JJJ and Smythe set off for the scene of the action, giving Spidey precious moments to do what he does best. Using his wall-crawling abilities in a heretofore unseen manner, Spidey uses the adhesive power of his fingertips to pop the housing off of the robot's exterior. Then it's just a matter of doping out where the robot's off button is, and our hero is free. But will he make it in time? Jameson and Smythe arrive to see Spider-Man writhing in the robot's grasp, but when JJJ pulls Spidey's mask off, he gets an unexpected surprise. The costume is empty, Spidey having escaped moments before. Angered and humiliated, Jameson stalks off, and Peter returns home. Good thing he's got that spare costume, huh? Well, about that. Seems Aunt May was doing a bit of a rummage and came across Petey's new gear. Either he is really lazy in his hiding, or she is very thorough in her cleaning. Some quick thinking sees Peter come up with a fib, one that Aunt May accepts without much of a fuss. Man, for a superhero, this kid is pretty morally gray. The issue ends with a semi-cliffhanger, in that Peter is now Sans costume. Always leave him hanging.
What an issue, huh? Stan and Steve really packed a lot into 21 pages. The creators juggled Peter's personal and professional life, the trials and tribulations of his webbed alter ego, and the introduction of one of Spider-Man's most persistent nemesis effortlessly. Even Betty Brant got a chance to shine. It's a dynamite issue, one that sees the creators firing on all cylinders. Sadly, Stan and Steve would cease their collaboration shortly after this issue, but the book is a shining example of the team at their creative peak. It's top shelf. Next up, a book that I have a personal connection with. It's not what you might think. I didn't have a letter printed or win any contests. Instead, mine is a far humbler tale, but one worth quickly mentioning. You see, as a kid, Spidey was a favorite. He wasn't just a character I liked. He was an object of intense fascination to me. I can vividly remember the Mego box and figure, better than what I ate for dinner a couple hours ago. I read and reread the comics endlessly, absorbing every nuance, and when I read this one, well, it really knocked me out. Why is that? Let's get right to it.
We begin with action as Spidey is attacked from above by no less than Doctor Octopus. You know the story. Ock has had enough of the bothersome wall crawler who has meddled in his schemes for the last time. It's that same old song and dance. Only Spidey isn't his usual quippy self. A strange illness has left the hero weakened, and soon enough, one of Doc's metal appendages connects, sending our hero plummeting to the streets below. As he falls, Spidey drops the power harness he'd taken from Ock's henchman in the previous issue. In the heat of the battle, the device falls onto a nearby television antenna, where it is quickly forgotten. Ock presses his advantage, bearing down on the stunned hero. Spidey gamely attempts to leap out of the way, but Ock manages to tear the wall-crawler's mask off in the process. However, before he can see his foe's true identity, Doc catches a faceful of web fluid, which blinds him just long enough for the now unmasked Spidey to escape. Racked by stomach cramps, the web-slinger can barely work his camera, and he's forced to flee the fight without getting all that many pics to sell to Jameson. Below, Ock is enraged his longtime enemy has escaped him once again, but a call from one of his henchmen sees him drop Spidey's mask and return to home base. Not long after, young Randy Robertson is headed to his parents for dinner.
On the way, he discovers the discarded mask, taking it to his father, city editor of the Daily Bugle, Randy Robertson. Hours later, and Peter is still hanging around the rooftops. Every time he thinks the spasms have passed, they return. Hey, I can relate. I get pretty much the same effect whenever I eat too much dry sautéed broccoli. Cut to Doc talking to one of his operatives skulking outside of a nightclub. Apparently the man Ock seeks is somewhere within, but we quickly discover it's a setup, with Ock Stooley catching some hot lead for his trouble. It's all the work of the underworld's newest power player, a chicken wing-loving gangster primed to make his move. Ock comes on like gangbusters, attacking the nightclub. The Doc knows a setup when he sees one, and he lays waste to his competitor's army. Such an affront can only be seen as a declaration of war. We cut back to Parker, who's finally made it home. Only it's not smooth sailing for old Petey, as the sickness plays upon his deepest fears and anxieties. Luckily, girlfriend Gwen Stacy has arrived and summoned a doctor who is quick to come to a diagnosis. Peter's got himself one sweet little duodenal ulcer. The doc prescribes a limited diet and pills 3 times a day, but we all know the cure for what ails this kid is getting back into harness and walloping Doc Ock. Only Pete is still incredibly weak. To build up some strength, he opts to pop by the Bugle and sell the few shots he does have of his previous confrontation with Ock, but upon arriving is treated to a huge shock. The publisher has the lost Spider-Man mask proudly pinned to the office corkboard, and unless they're making these things marked with blood, my boy, that's the real McCoy. Colleague Ned Leeds clues Pete in about a lead to track down his missing Aunt May. Swinging off towards an employment agency in the Lower East Side, Spidey makes a little detour to pick up a new mask at the costume shop. Looks like the owner is a rabid Marvel booster. The guy's even got an Iron Man costume, and this was 40 years before the movie. Spider-Man then heads into town, but another bout of cramp slows him down. He takes a moment to collect himself, but a moment is all that Doc Ock needs. Dropping down from below, Octopus sends his indestructible metal tentacles sweeping through the air. Man, I hope the folks downtown have chimney insurance. Spidey puts on a brave face, but his ulcer has left him too weak to fight. However, the area is oddly familiar to the web spinner. In fact, this is near the area he last fought Ock, and maybe, just maybe, there's still a chance to get out of this alive. Overly confident, Ock closes in on his brightly clad foe, swinging around the wall, only to catch a stunning sock on the jaw. What's this? Spidey has found the discarded power harness, and it fits him like a glove. His strength, and more importantly confidence, boosted by the harness, Spidey takes the offensive, diving into the fray. He proceeds to rain a series of devastating blows down on his attacker, driving Ock across the rooftop before delivering a staggering knockout blow. Standing over his unconscious foe, Spidey notes the power harness ran out of juice 5 minutes ago, one of those instantly classic Marvel moments that showed why the company had overtaken DC in both popularity and storytelling prowess. Only old Webhead wasn't given long to celebrate his victory, as it's then Hammerhead and his goons show up, leaving readers on another jaw-dropping cliffhanger. To say this issue had an effect on me would be understating it. Spidey was already my hero thanks to his drive and moxie. Seeing him at such a low ebb but then fighting his way back to a knockout victory had young Mink cheering in his bedroom. The fact that he did it in a borrowed mask and power harness did not escape my notice. Indeed, the mask that Spidey wore here looked more than a little bit like the one that I sported when reimagining the web-slinger's adventures. While it had bothered me that the eyes on my mask weren't opaque white, suddenly they didn't have to be. Add in a knotted plastic yellow jump rope tied around my wrists and over my underoos to simulate the power harness, and suddenly I could recreate this very battle. What the hell my mother thought that I was doing leaping and careening about in the backyard was anybody's guess, but hey, It kept me off the streets. We're going to wrap things up with another issue that really sent me as a young reader. Indeed, when my buddy Butch Baxvinskis brought it to morning mass one spring morning way back in the summer of 1976, I couldn't believe it. Spidey was dead to rights this time. I mean, pictures don't lie. How was the web slinger going to get out of this one? Well, to find out, I remember I traded Butch one of the Star Wars figures that I had that he needed. Hardly the most equitable of exchanges, but I just had to know. Let's get into it. Our tale begins in a surprisingly mundane fashion, with Spidey discovering a hole in his boot. At the same time, on the street below, a paddy wagon is hijacked by a gang of fleeing criminals. Spidey streaks into the scene, wresting a light pole from the sidewalk and striking the fleeing wagon head-on, smashing the engine. The cons pile out, guns blasting, but our hero makes short work of them with his webbing. After dispatching Larry and Curly here, he has a quick chat with the cops before swinging off. By now, some of New York's finest had come to realize that Spidey was a force for good, and we often saw seasoned officers talking their hot-headed young partners down from taking pot shots at the wall crawler. We cut away to the campus of Empire State University, where Dr. Marla Madison shows off her progress on repairing the most recent iteration of Professor Smythe's robot. Now rebranded the far more sellable Spider Slayer, Dr. Madison chats with the man himself, J. Jonah Jameson, getting readers caught up on the events of the previous issue. For a change, Jameson is on the other end of newspaper criticism, as his rival, K.J. Clayton at the Globe, has run an expose on Jameson's unlawful use of the robot to capture Spider-Man. Unwilling to net even more bad publicity, JJJ decides to confront his Spider-Man problem in a more direct fashion. Peter arrives home just in time to answer the door. Why, it's the old skinflint himself. To what does Pete owe this unexpected pleasure? After a ritualistic bit of beating around the bush, Jameson lets Parker have it. He seizes Pete by the hair, jerking his head to and fro. Much to the publisher's surprise, no seam line appears at Peter's neck. Why, he isn't wearing a mask at all. Certain the old man has flipped his flat top, Pete extricates himself with a judo move, demanding to know what this is all about. Jameson is more than happy to oblige. He produces an envelope and tosses it to the tabletop, accusing Peter of being Spider-Man. When the envelope is opened, we're treated to 3 photographs which appear to show Spider-Man discarding the body of Peter Parker by incinerating it in a smokestack. And while longtime readers know this was the real Peter disposing of his dead clone, Jameson lacks our omniscience. Peter proceeds cautiously, having anticipated this moment. He says there's something familiar about the photographs and rushes to his archives. After much searching, Peter produces 3 separate images which he claims are the source of Jameson's doctored photo. After a moment's deliberation, Jameson recants his accusation, apologizing. Parker accepts, but pushing his luck, and tries Jonah for a raise. The publisher isn't all that sorry for being wrong after all and storms off in a huff, leaving Parker to slide down the door in relief. We quickly learn that it was Pete himself who created this proof after stealing the originals from Jameson's office. With that issue seemingly resolved, we get a little skylarking from Spidey, and this cameo from some guy whose face is familiar, but name escapes me. Catching his breath, our hero's spider sense begins to tingle, alerting him to a suspicious presence on the street below. He watches an overcoated stranger slip inside a condemned building. In short order, 2 others appear, also going inside. His curiosity piqued, Spidey snags the 3rd man, pulling him a dozen stories up for a little shakedown. Only these Batman-style interrogation tactics don't come easy to Spidey, and he nearly kills the guy for his trouble. That said, he does get the info he's looking for. In an abandoned subway tunnel, this colorfully clad clutch of characters test out a new experimental laser, but Spidey's there to put an end to the fun. However, while the men themselves are little concerned, the laser on wheels proves to be a stickier wicket. Its lancing blasts keep Spidey on the defensive, but with a little persistence, our hero closes the gap and gets in close enough to knock out the laser's driver. Using his renowned brilliance, Spidey flicks, well, the only switch on the machine, shutting the devastating device down. His respite is short-lived, however, as the gang is back up and on their feet. We're treated to this brutal scene where a former prizefighter breaks his own hands punching Spider-Man. Sheesh. Webhead makes short work of the goons, but it's clear there's more to this scenario than meets the eye. Cue our villain, who obligingly reveals himself for the issue's cliffhanger. And even Spidey's surprised to find this tubby smoking silhouette isn't Wilson Fisk, but is instead Dr. Faustus?
Okay, so Dr. Faustus was no kingpin. Hell, he wasn't even a gibbon, but I love this issue nonetheless. The scene of JJJ grabbing Petey by the hair really struck me, especially since my very Catholic grandmother used to do the same thing to me when I stepped out of line. I remember being riveted by Pete's explanation of the incriminating pictures. The idea that photographic images could be altered and manipulated like that wasn't something that I'd previously considered. It was a compelling concept and one that went on to inform my own later artwork. The fact that Pete was able to pull the wool over old J. Jonah's eyes yet again was just the icing on the webbed cake. J. Jonah Jameson is Spider-Man's greatest nemesis. He doesn't need superpowers or a masked alter ego. Jameson's strength as an antagonist is his defining feature, the immutable and unyielding stubbornness which saw him go from a daydreaming child on a doorstep to one of the most influential men in New York City. It's what drives him, seeing him succeed where others who dare fail. That said, the strength is also his Achilles heel, his unwillingness to waver or be swayed about Spider-Man, the prime mover in his hubris. Oh, sure, JJJ has admitted innumerable times he was wrong about Spider-Man, issuing retraction after retraction to the stories he's published, but we know that, in the end, nothing really changes. In spite of how many times Spidey pulls his fat out of the fire, Jameson will always be the first to put the boot in when the wall crawler is down. And that's what makes him so great. Jonah Jameson is a bitter old crank, and we wouldn't have him any other way. So what do you think? Is Norman Osborn the bigger baddie? Does Doc Ock take the evil cake in the Spider-Rogues gallery? Let me know in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this program, please consider purchasing a mug, a t-shirt, or one of the other fine items that you can only find in the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics swag shop. Every penny goes towards getting my Aunt May the medicine she so badly needs to cling to life one more day. I'm Jason Mink, and I hope to see you next week at breakfast!